Good day to you, my loves, my friends, and community. The topic that I want to bring to you this morning is how to be compassionate in toxic situations without dehumanizing anyone. The key to this conversation is going to be honesty and boundaries. So let's, as you join, give a love, a heart, a comment, a share. Let me know you're here, you're present if you are so inspired. And as we just come into this space together, let's take a nice breath into our beautiful bodies. Like the sign behind me says, breathe. It's pretty much the first go-to in any situation. Breathe. Soften your belly. Drop your shoulders. Let your mouth, let your jaw, let your face relax. Good morning, Jenny. Nice to see you, love. Thank you for joining. Let's go ahead and like ground your feet, ground into your body, like relax deep down into your pelvis. Really take up the space. Anytime we're going to talk about boundaries, we want to know that it's okay for us to take up our own space. Yeah, there we go. And we're just, taking good deep breaths. Hi, Jessica. I love you so much. Thank you for being here. Oh my gosh. Your fucking presence just made me feel so emotional. This is a tender topic because usually when we get put in these situations where we have to deal with someone who is in a situation that feels toxic, we don't have a hard time because we don't care about them. We have a hard time because we do care about them. So it's hi Naomi. Jessica says, feeling this heaviness right with you. Yeah, this is hard shit. This is hard shit. And fuck. I'm in a specific situation personally, which is why I wanted to talk about it. And I'm not going to air my dirty laundry in public and name names and all that stuff because that doesn't need to be a part of the catharsis. But acknowledging first and primarily in any situation, you're only dealing with human beings. So when we're super frustrated, when we're super hurt, when we're angry, when we're confused, the first thing that we want to do is we want to discharge all that discomfort. We want to discharge that pain. And one of the ways that we tend to do that is we blame and we shame and we name call. And the second we step into a dehumanizing position where that is coming from us, projected at another person, we also dehumanize ourselves in the process, which actually diminishes our power and capacity to deal with the situation as it is. So the first thing in any toxic situation, you want to remember that there is actually no such thing as a toxic person. Everybody has a core of innocence and inherent basic goodness. But what happens with people who choose toxic coping mechanisms, who choose to engage in toxic behaviors over time, is that those toxic behaviors become ingrained in their identity. And rather than standing up for their own basic goodness, they will stand up and they will defend their own toxicity. And that is what, that's what creates what we tend to think of as a toxic person. They become solidified in their toxic coping mechanisms and their defensiveness and in those strategies. And so it's really difficult because they will protect those behaviors. They will justify those behaviors. And if you or if I want to address those behaviors, we need to be really clear and conscious in the way that we do it so that we're separating the being from what they're doing. This doesn't necessarily mean that that person's going to choose to change if you acknowledge that, like, no, it's not you who's really toxic, it's your decisions and behaviors. We are comprised as identities of our choices over time. Our choices comprise our identity over time. It's not who we are, but how we identify with how we move through the world becomes our interface with it. And for someone who is either emotionally abusive, who is an addict, who is, I think that covers it. Neglectful, emotionally abusive, addicted. That's kind of what comprises toxicity, right? For somebody who's ingrained in those behaviors, where that has kind of become a part of their identity, we cannot change how they interface with the world. And if we continue to participate in that, then we remain a part of that interface. And it's a dynamic. That's why I put it out there. Situation, not people. These are situations. This is situational. And so we also take a role and a responsibility in how we show up with them. And if we agree to name call and dehumanize anyone, whether it's the president or your ex-husband, it doesn't matter. It dehumanizes us in the process. It diminishes our power and capacity to deal with that situation. So in order to stand in a place of compassion, we have to also actually stand in a place of power, which means that we are acknowledging primarily our own humanity. And then from the place of acknowledging our own humanity, we can also acknowledge the humanity of this other being who is lost in these adaptations, who is, most likely stuck in some long held childhood wound that they've never had the opportunity or the skillful means to address. And in order for us to hold that perspective, we have to have a certain amount of skillful means at our disposal. And so that comes back to us, our inherent value of our basic goodness, first and primarily. I'm a good being. It's not like I'm a good person as in I'm better than them. It's just that my basic goodness is the most important thing. And so therefore, demoralizing and dehumanizing them any further is going to also take me down in the process. Taking a higher road does not mean that you are turning a blind eye to people's choices, incongruent and toxic behaviors. It means that you acknowledge their humanity no matter what they do. It also means that you acknowledge that if they will not acknowledge that humanity in themselves, that they are a danger not only to themselves, but they can be a danger to you. And they can be a danger to anyone else that's in your life. And this is particularly relevant if we have children. If we're trying to take the higher road by like maintaining a relationship, like the communication, the connection, because, we want our child to be a part of this person's life, we're actually doing a greater disservice to everyone in the process, because we are saying with our participation that these behaviors are okay, that it's okay to expose that child to these behaviors. And I'm responsible for that. That's something that I did younger in my life, because I had a daughter with a person who we were both addicts at one point in time. And, one of us got clean and the other one didn't. And it was like, I believed because I loved this person and I loved my daughter. I believed at that time in my life that the best thing for me to do was to do everything in my power to make sure that he continued to be a part of her life. Right. And I regret that. I regret that I did not tell the truth, as uncomfortable as it was, to first myself, that this person's behaviors do not indicate someone who wants to be a responsible, loving, caring individual. I regret that I didn't tell that truth to myself, and that I didn't allow that truth to be exposed for what it was to my daughter. I regret that I didn't do a better job protecting her, that my compassion was at that point uninformed. And you could even call it a little bit of an idiot compassion, because it was coming from a place of naivete instead of true innocence, because I wasn't in a position where I had the skillful means to protect my innocence, and thereby regards my daughter's innocence as well. Hi, Rhea. Thank you for saying hello. Good morning. Nice to see you. This is making sense to you guys at all? Is anybody resonating with what I'm sharing? So, yeah, so the first thing that we have to do is we have to acknowledge that the protection of innocence comes first, and that is the acknowledgement of our own basic goodness and our rights and our holy right to stand up for that. And that is actually like a point of entry into vulnerability, because we're not throwing ourselves under the bus to make someone else comfortable, or to maintain a connection that is either one-sided or where the interface isn't compatible. Laura says, yes, resonates too much. Rhea says, yes, resonating. Thank you. I appreciate your guys' feedback, because it helps me stay grounded in this conversation, and it helps me feel like we're having a conversation as well. And I want this to be a conversation because it's important to talk about. Idiot compassion, huge wisdom there. Yes, idiot compassion is totally a thing. And it is the protection of naivete instead of the protection of innocence. It is allowing for the ignorance to continue. It is allowing for the suffering to continue underneath the guise of exercising compassion, when it is just really actually allowing, it is us kind of using a trance state to disacknowledge our own level of discomfort, and by engaging through vulnerability with that discomfort to have access to our power, which actually gives us access to true compassion. And it's not power over, because when I'm in a state of compassion and I'm saying, absolutely, you are not fucking going to cross that line, I'm coming from a place of deep vulnerability and acknowledging that I have the right to protect that vulnerability in myself. And I have the right to see that there is that vulnerability in this other being, but that they are in such a state where they're not going to acknowledge that about themselves, that the way that they conduct themselves in their life is potentially not only toxic to me and mine, but is also potentially dangerous. And that comes into play when their adaptations, or when their unconscious confusion has boiled up to the point where they can become violent, or in some cases where the police are involved. It's like you have to understand that the protection of the innocence and goodness outweighs the illusion of connection. Always, absolutely always. Because without the protection of innocence and goodness, there is actually no connection to be had, because a person will completely disconnect from their own goodness and innocence, and identify with their coping mechanisms, identify with their addiction, over-identify with their pain, identify with being a victim, identify with being a perpetrator, which is usually in their mind being a victim. And you cannot change the way that a person identifies with themselves. You can only change the way that you interface. Soak that in. It's important. Coming over to comments. Noted, Naomi. We have a holy right to stand up for innocence. Bing! Which is more important than maintaining any connection. Yes, in contrast, idiot compassion is the protection of the naive, which prolongs suffering. Did I get this right? Fuck yes, you nailed it. Everybody loved Naomi. She's a genius. And I so appreciate you articulating that in the comments, because yes, that sums it up right there in a nutshell. Rhea says, that's been my experience, the violence under the surface. Absolutely. And more than likely, the violence under the surface has been violence that they themselves have internalized from somebody else, but that they've never been presented with the skillful means to deal with, to navigate, to process. I hope that makes sense to you guys. But that can't be your responsibility. That cannot be your responsibility. And by refusing to address it, by refusing to be truthful about it, we actually prolong the pain and suffering of everybody involved. Sherry says, what was the last comment you made? The addict can only. The addict, I'm not sure, but I will absolutely, I will elucidate on that The addict can only. So an addict can only experience reality within the spectrum of what their vibrational frequency and their narrative will allow. And that is the truth with anybody. And to a certain degree, we're all addicts and we're all functioning in life to lesser and greater degrees of trance. And we're using adaptations and coping strategies and soothing mechanisms, sometimes as addictions, but really, truly, deeply as ways to try to soothe that pain. But anyone can only deal with reality to the degree that they can experience their own emotions, that they can relate those emotions to others, and that they can actually navigate the narrative of their own personal narrative versus what might be a greater, more collective narrative. So this person, this person in my life that brought my desire to bring this conversation to the table, their narrative is that everybody's against them, basically. Like anybody who has ever been with them, we become we become heinous bitches in their eyes eventually, all of us. And that's fine, because what you can't expect is when you're dealing with someone who is ingrained in their own toxic situation, don't expect them to thank you for being honest with them. They're not going to, because that honesty challenges their narrative. And if they're not willing to change that narrative to include new information, you basically hit this wall of cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is this, for anybody who doesn't understand or hasn't heard the term. Cognitive dissonance is when the presentation of new information directly conflicts with somebody's reality construct to the point where it makes them so uncomfortable that then rather than change their narrative of reality, or rather than change their reality construct, they will shut down the new information in order to cling to what feels like their reality. So I want to pause and breathe, because there's a lot of information and this is important to digest, and I need to slow down. I need to slow down. So let's all come back, because we're all capable of cognitive dissonance, and this is absolutely not about othering. This is why I put without dehumanizing anyone in there, because it's so important. And in a bigger sense, like, this is why anybody who knows me knows that I'm not a Trump supporter. If he does something good, I will share that on my wall. If he does something atrocious, I will share that on my wall. I consider myself to be more apolitical than politically affiliated with anything. I am interested in human behavior and the way that those behaviors affect us all, and the way that we participate in those. So you will never see me name calling 45. I won't do it, because it dehumanizes me. It dehumanizes me in the process. I'm a little less skilled at this with this other person in my life. It's like I referred to them in a group where I shared some information that I feel like that this person is just like this turd that won't flush, and in the process of him not flushing, he's like staining the bowl in everyone's life all around him. And it's kind of dehumanizing, but it's also sort of like this symbolic function of reality, because, honestly, like, turds are just a part of life. It's like we all make them. It's something that we all have to deal with. Like, you've heard that. I don't know if you've heard the saying, like, everybody's got an asshole. It's like, yeah, and we're all a little bit of a shitty person inside, and we just don't want to let that get out of control. We've all got shit inside of us. We've all got an asshole. We don't want to like solidify like and identify like one person in our life as being that. We want to acknowledge, like, as human beings, we're totally capable of being a shitty asshole ourselves. And that's what keeps it grounded. That's what keeps it compassionate. That's what keeps it human. is we're including our own shitty humanity in the process of calling out other people and theirs, so that we're not identifying them as being shitty assholes. We are actually calling out and identifying shitty behavior. There's a big difference, and it's important. Meg says, dealing with this with a family member, this is so helpful. Thank you. I'm glad it's helpful. And yeah, it's so hard with family too, because like there's that mixture of love in there as well. Like we don't stop loving someone just because they're a jerk. And it's actually loving. It's actually so deeply loving to point out jerky behavior and to acknowledge if a person will not have that conversation about how their behavior is affecting other people, that they are more identified with their behavior than they are with relating to the rest of us. And that's their choice, and we cannot change it. Laura says, seriously, a beautiful analogy. You're welcome. I have it in me to talk some pretty shit sometimes. So there you go. Meg says the relational dynamics are so hard to navigate. I'm a shit too. Yeah. Let's just all raise our hands and acknowledge we can all be shits. Yeah. And here's the beautiful thing. When we acknowledge that we can be shits, then we don't have to defend our own shitty behavior. And that makes us actually more compassionate, more humane, and more capable of dealing with shitty behavior on a whole. Because if we're not trying to edit out our own shitty behavior and make ourselves to be like these like judgy McJudgerton people, right? And like, oh, you're the addict and you're the shit and you're the shitty behavior and that's it, right? No. I have like my little proclivities and addictions, absolutely. And I'll acknowledge them. And I have my shitty behaviors and I have my coping strategies and all of that. I have to acknowledge that. That humanizes me in the process of dealing with these other human behaviors, which is what we're doing, which is exactly what we're doing. Rhea says, loving the call outs. Yeah, absolutely. Our willingness and ability to call these behaviors out in ourselves allow for us to be more effective at calling out the behaviors in others. And one of the key things that we need to learn that we often don't as parents is the difference between addressing a child as if there's something wrong with them versus they've done something that, stepped out of alignment. And if that isn't something that we experience when we're younger, it's something that we have a hard time with when we're older. The difference is being like, you're this, like you're a slob. There you go. Like you're a slob rather than like your room's a mess and you need to clean it. You see the difference? And it's the same thing. The same thing happens a lot with addicts and with allegedly toxic people. Is that, oh, you're toxic and you're an addict, and that means, that I get to put you in this position in my reality, and now that I've defined you as that, I can redefine myself as something else that relates to you from that space, rather than acknowledging you are choosing to do this, and that is painful, and it's harmful, and it is uncomfortable, and the way that your behavior affects the rest of us makes it impossible for me to be in a relationship with you. Does that make sense, you guys? It's really important. So let's breathe. This is an important thing to be able to navigate, not only in our own personal relationships, but in the bigger world at large as well, because this is what makes like political discussion seem really immature and impossible at this point in our evolution. This is where like all these people are just sort of coming from this triggered place and, just bouncing back with this defensiveness instead of actually having conversations where we're talking about behaviors and policies and things that are going on in the world. We've all sort of moved into these different camps, whether that's politically, religiously, or even just in a more tribal mentality state. And we're identifying with that tribe, and then any other tribe that has a perspective that's different from ours is kind of the other, is sort of the bad guy. And this is indicative of trance behavior. This is indicative of a deep trance state, and it makes compassion really difficult to access, and it makes intelligence really difficult to access too, because it reinforms and it perpetuates a state of cognitive dissonance. Because if somebody comes along who's in a tribe with information that contradicts your information, you're likely going to shut down that information because it doesn't match the narrative of your tribe. And this is the danger of tribal mentality. There's a lot of good in it. Community, a sense of belonging, a sense of trust and solidarity. Those are all really beautiful things. But if those overweigh rationality and the ability to open ourselves up and be compassionate and take in new information, then we need to look at that as well. Mike Munson, hi Mike. Mike says, being intimate and vulnerable when communicating instead of impatient and intolerant will help. Yes, absolutely. And intimacy starts with us, part of the thing of like with the tribal mentality or with the group set mentality is that we can actually sort of give up a state of genuine intimacy for the experience of fitting in, which we can misconstrue as belonging. And if that state of openness and tenderness and tolerance isn't actually present within ourselves, then we're not coming from a place of intimacy. We're coming from a place of, we're coming from a completely different kind of mentality. Intimacy does not necessarily mean the absence of fierceness either. And innocence and fierceness can absolutely go together. Defensiveness and innocence don't go together. Defensiveness is, it's kind of this trance state that is in place to kind of protect the ignorance. And ignorance, if you break it down to what a trance is ignorance is editing or deleting out information. So I just had this conversation with this person, over the web this morning, and I was kind of calling them out on some of their behaviors and just saying, if you want to, this is an opportunity, for you to see that this is how you're affecting the rest of us, and it hurts and it's heartbreaking and it's difficult. Pausing, I need to let my thought catch up. But it's coming from such a place of tenderness, because my desire to have that conversation is coming from the place to protect and actually to promote the growth of innocence and tenderness and communication. The difficult thing when it comes to communicating with people who are in a state of ignorance is that if you're coming from a place of vulnerability and they're coming from a place of ignorance, you can hold that state of vulnerability in yourself and you can try to hold it and hold the vision. The Immaculate Concept is one way to talk about it for this other person. But if they're not willing to move into that state of vulnerability for themselves, you can't do that for them. You can't do it. And like I said, right around the top of this conversation is the protection of innocence has to come over the illusion. It has to be held over the illusion of connection, because without innocence, there is no actual connection. There are these various levels that we're sort of engaging from, these trance places that aren't real connection anyways, and they're definitely not real communication. So understanding if a person is in a state of ignoring reality, this is a function of trance. There are two ways that we function in trance, and it's just the way it is. And from this standpoint, understanding positivity and negativity from a trance standpoint will also help you to be more inclusive of all the energy, vibrations, and feelings in your reality, because there's no such thing as a positive state and there's no such thing as a negative state. There's a negative trance, which is us disappearing information from our reality. So it is basically a state of ignorance. We are ignoring, we are deleting information that does not fit our current state, that does not fit in our current narrative. And so that is one of the places where cognitive dissonance comes from, is if you try to introduce information into the state of the trance of ignorance, people will shut it down. They can't go there. The other side of that trance is the positivity trance, where whatever a person is focusing on is the focus of their reality. Now, you hear this a lot in the New Age talk, like only focus on the positive, no negative vibes here, only positive vibes here, right? This is total trance trash talk. And like, if you hear it, you see it, you need to call it out, and you need to call it out in yourself, because it does not actually support a more wholesome, more vulnerable, humane interface with reality. It reinforces trance states, and it's dangerous. So understand both positive and negative are trance states, and that compassion, real vulnerable compassion, actually exists in the middle. And that is us being open and tender and willing to look at facts and information and to adjust our perspective of reality to be more inclusive of more humanity, starting first and foremost with our own. Raya says she likes the trance trash talk. I know, it's one of my favorite things, trance trash talk. We should do it. I would do a podcast like called that, but I'm afraid it would get misinterpreted to mean something else. And I'm not interested in adding any confusion to the world. So addicts are very often in both trances, right? And we both do this, we all do this to a certain degree, but you know, an addict is focusing solely on the temporary relief of their distress and confusion and pain. And so the focus on the positive release by engaging in whatever substance or behavior gives them that sense of relief becomes the positive trance. And then the negative trance comes into effect, whereas they delete all of the information. They delete and edit out all of the information that is coming from their reality as feedback, to the degree where they might have to look at or examine their behaviors as not actually leading to the outcome that they think that they are leading to. And Gabor Mate has a wonderful definition of addiction. It is the prolonged engagement with any substance or behavior that has short-term benefits and long-term, he uses the term negative consequences, but the long-term consequences that build up over time. Naomi, speaking of trance states, I spent a good 20 years believing that if I just explained my feelings, the situation better, that he would understand and be more responsive to my needs. A huge milestone for me was letting go of that belief. My belief in that resulted in me pouring massive energy into a black hole. When I gave that energy back to myself, it was fucking amazing. And that, my love, is actually, you know, that is kind of the definition of what a healthy boundary is realizing that we cannot, that our love poured into another being to the degree where they will not tend to themselves cannot change them, can't change their reality, and really can't change our reality either. Naomi goes on to say, so when I find myself tempted to engage with that again, it helps me to think about, what if I used all that energy to create something that I love instead? Absolutely. And that is the healthy, natural alchemy of putting a healthy boundary in place. And I think I have a link here. I wrote a piece about this some while ago. It's actually the very first thing I ever published on Elephant Journal, and it's been my most popular piece to date. So there's the link for that. Happiness and boundaries go hand in hand. Yeah. And, you know, we're kind of trained to be almost, how do I say this? We're kind of trained to be almost overly empathetic, and that we become dysfunctional in our empathy if our empathy is all about us being, too sensitive and being too focused on other people's needs, then we become dysfunctional in our empathy. And it is hard, Naomi. It's hard. And if you're a person who is naturally sort of more empathically inclined, you're more concerned about making other people happy, and you've kind of taken that whole that service thing to out of balance to this other end of the spectrum. Inserting a little bit of a healthy narcissism and positive self-regard into that equation is going to be what you need to do to actually reestablish a healthy boundary. And we can't go to black and white, because we can't go too far to this end of the spectrum because that's unhealthy. We can't go too far to this end of the spectrum because that's unhealthy. Somewhere in the middle, where we're including both sides of the spectrum, that we have the right to be selfish a little bit, that we have the right to, and that it's part of our nature to be giving and caring. Somewhere in there is a healthy balance that actually allows us to stand in both our innocence and our power. If you think of your innocence and your basic goodness as sort of being this core, tender, opening space. So let's feel into this together. So take a breath into your bodies now. And the word is tenderness. So just let that tenderness arise in you. And it helps to soften the belly. It helps to drop the shoulders. It helps to, shake your body loose. We hold a lot of defensive energy in our body. And it doesn't let us actually be authentically in a responsive state. It's a frozen kind of trance response state. So just let yourself breathe into that tenderness. And there you go. Feel the body soften. Feel the state change. I was pretty charged just a moment ago. Who can notice that? Who can notice that state shift? Softening, opening, relaxing, tenderness. Most of us don't move through the world this way because we haven't consciously processed the wounds that we're still defending, but also because there's so much stimulus in the world in any given moment. We actually have to consciously come back to this now instead of just sort of organically existing in this state for most of us. But this is our natural state, and it feels good. And when you let yourself kind of go into this state, this vulnerability naturally emerges. Yeah, raise his hand, Rhea. Thank you. You can feel it. It's palpable. And it's a noticeable shift. So think about this. This is a little baby. This is just the most tender part of yourself. And it's beautiful. It's sweet. It's warm. Right? It's like all these wonderful feelings. And something, something comes along that wants to interfere with the state, that wants to violate. Feel the energy that naturally rises in response to that. There. Yeah, you're not, when you're in right mind and right alignment, you're not going to let something violate this. You're not going to do it. And as an adult, you have the capacity and the power and the right to protect yourself in ways that you didn't when you were a child. You have the right to exercise that. And that is where those healthy boundaries are born from. How many of you guys could feel the state shift when I introduced the energy of violation coming into that space of vulnerability? Felt your natural response to that? You want to protect it. You may also have felt the fight or flight mechanism kick in, which is also okay, because that's actually a form of how we can protect ourselves as well. But you want to know that your right, R-I-T-E, holy right, to exercise protection around your tenderness and innocence is where your healthy boundaries are born from. And that is what intelligently informs you of how to communicate and how to relate to people who they themselves are in a state where their violation of their own basic goodness through their choices and behaviors, which was probably programmed and taught to them, has become a danger to your own basic goodness and innocence. And this does not make them any less human. This does not make you any less human. It is just how you take in and deal with the information that you need to be able to see and feel and deal with in order to communicate and relate effectively, compassionately, and safely. And my battery is draining here, which tells me that we're probably at a pretty good place to be wrapping this conversation up. So if anybody has any final questions, comments that they want to share, I'm going to leave the space open to go ahead and drop that in there. I hope this conversation has been helpful for you guys. I think this is a really important topic for us to move into more compassionately, because we, sometimes, it's right, like to cut communication off with a person, but we also want to be aware that we don't want to cut the communication off with ourselves that we need to be having in the process, which is what keeps us alive and engaged and open to our own humanity and open to each other's humanity as well. So there is my website. This is what I do for a living. If this conversation has been helpful for you, I would ask that you share it with your community. There's a couple of links that I can also come back and drop into this chat with some groups that I run. Probably the most significant one is called Numb No More. So you can search it and I can add you, and I'll come back and I'll drop the link in here. Mike Munson says, adult children of alcoholics and other abusive parenting group, Shamanistic and Course in Miracles are all great courses. Yeah, thanks for dropping that information in there, Mike. Rhea says, incredibly helpful, much appreciated. I'm really glad. Thank you. Like I said, I'm in a situation with this myself, but I've been navigating this for years, and I feel distress as a human, that I still have to be dealing with this and that my loved ones still have to be dealing with this. And I also feel this incredible clarity and power and compassion moving through this situation, because I feel like I don't think I have 100% clarity on this. I won't set myself up for like stumbling into arrogance there. I think I have a good deal of clarity, and my willingness to see everybody as a human and to address the behavior as opposed to falling into the temporary relief of blaming and shaming and name calling. Like I won't do it. And it's helpful. It's helpful for all of us to remember that that is actually the way that we take the higher road, is to continue to hold the state of shared humanity. And that is what being compassionate is, while taking in all of the information and all of the facts and actually addressing with those in a mature, safe, and constructive manner. So as my power drains here on my laptop, let's finish this conversation with deep breath back into the body, softening of the body, bringing that tenderness back up. And as you bring that tenderness up, also allow for that inner warrior for that protective essence to also rise with it, so that you are walking through the world in love, in wisdom, and in power. This is the holy trifecta right there. And Laura says, I'm a fucking gift. Thank you. So are you, love. Sandy, hi, sweetheart. Good to see you. Gratitude for this topic. Absolutely. Gratitude for all of you for joining. Thank you. And like I said, if it's a benefit, please share with your community. A lot of what I work with in my practice is actually boundaries, compassion, and helping people find the right balance and heal this sort of empathic, narcissistic, dysfunctional split, and move through the world more wholesomely, more compassionately, more powerfully, and more creatively. So if you resonate with that, you can find me. Cheryl, hi. She says, beautiful. You guys are all beautiful. I so deeply appreciate you participating in this conversation and taking this information into the world and enacting it in whatever way is right and wholesome and in alignment for you. It's something that we need to be dealing with as an adults in a more adult way. So thank you for showing up and for glowing up. And please, I always invite everybody, if with consent, to go back through and read the comments and befriend each other, because part of the reason that I do these things is in the interest and hope and desire, the interest and hope and desire of creating more community through this medium of social media. Naomi, holy trifecta is love, power, and intelligence. Intelligence. Love, power, and intelligence. So we need all three to move through the world effectively. We need the wisdom to be able to see what needs to be done and to discern. We need love to keep our hearts open, to keep us remaining tender to our sadness and to, and to the difficulties, to remain open and tender to that. And we need power in order to be able to take action. It's not power over ever. It is power with and for. And from that holy trifecta is really honestly where compassion is born. It is sort of the container that holds those together. And it lets us exercise compassion more effectively, because it is a skill and it's a state, but it requires skillful means to live in that state. And that requires the participation of everything that I've talked about through this whole conversation. It's taking in the information, and it is remaining open to to yours and others' humanity, and choosing to protect your innocence, choosing to protect innocence at large, and to be a living, agent of goodness in the world. So with that, so much love to all of you guys. Go out and prosper. And thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl says, I'm a blessing. You guys are all blessings. Let's bless the world. Let's bless each other. Let's bless our time together. Thank you. So much love to you. Oh, I love you guys. I love you guys so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.